A mysterious cargo that needs military protection. A simple farm standing between a rural town and total economic collapse. A chance encounter between a humble farmer and a desperate pilot that changes everything. This is the extraordinary story of how Ellie Morgan's quick thinking and bravery not only saved a top-secret military mission but gave her struggling community a second chance at survival when all hope seemed lost. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The old pickup truck sputtered to life at 5:15 a.m. though. Ellie Morgan had already been awake since 4, reviewing weather satellite images on her tablet. At 35, the second-generation farmer's weathered face told a story of determination beyond her years. 5 consecutive seasons of devastating floods had left Pine Valley's once thriving agricultural community hanging by a thread. The Morgan family farm, with its 220 acres of once productive land stretching toward the Misty Mountains, had been the backbone of Pine Valley since 1962. Now, with insurance costs skyrocketing, soil remediation failing, and the nearby Eastridge Research Facility's imminent shutdown announcement, their community faced extinction from multiple directions. Ellie pulled her worn flannel tighter against the morning chill and climbed down from the truck. The drainage system she'd been desperately trying to improve was clogged again. 5 years of patching and improvising could only stretch resources so far. Inside the farmhouse, her mother Catherine sat at the kitchen table, the harsh light from her laptop illuminating her worried expression as she reviewed their latest bank statement. The bold red numbers told a story neither wanted to discuss again. "Any luck with the northwest field?" Catherine asked without looking up. "Water's still not draining properly," Ellie replied, pouring herself coffee from the pot that had been brewing since her mother woke up. "I can reconfigure the channels, but it's just buying time. The whole system needs an overhaul we can't afford." The kitchen where this conversation took place had once been the vibrant heart of the Morgan home. Photographs on the wall chronicled happier times. Ellie's grandfather standing proudly beside the first tractor they'd purchased in 1965. Her parents beaming during the record harvest of 2001. A young Ellie holding a blue ribbon from the county fair for her prize-winning drainage design. Catherine finally looked up from the screen, pushing it away as if physically rejecting the financial reality it represented. Congressman Reynolds' office called back yesterday. They're still reviewing options regarding the research facility closure. Her voice carried the weight of a woman who'd heard empty promises before. Eastridge Research Facility had been Pine Valley's economic lifeline for generations. Beyond providing direct employment, the scientific personnel had populated the towns. Schools supported local businesses and brought federal funding for infrastructure that benefited everyone. The Department of Energy's announcement 6 months ago that Eastridge was on the shutdown list had sent shockwaves through the community. "Political speak for don't count on us," Ellie said, taking a seat across from her mother. "What about the flood mitigation grant application?" Catherine shook her head. "Regional Development Authority says the emergency funding is going to the corporate farming operations in Westlake. Apparently, their economic impact justifies priority status." Ellie's jaw tightened. The corporate agricultural operations that had moved into the region 12 years ago had systematically acquired land, effectively strangling smaller family farms during the repeated flooding cycles. Their massive drainage systems diverted water toward individual farmers who couldn't afford to implement similar protections. "I've been working on an adapted drainage network," Ellie offered, "using recycled materials and the design I've been testing on the southeast field. With some modifications, we might reduce water retention by another 20% while improving soil health." Catherine's eyes softened with pride despite their dire situation. Her daughter's innovative approach to farming had kept them afloat longer than many of their neighbors. Ellie had an engineer's mind, always designing, adapting, and solving problems. With whatever materials were available. Your father would have called that Morgan ingenuity, Catherine said, a rare smile briefly lighting her face. He always said, the land might challenge us, but it's our creativity that sustains us. Ellie nodded, having heard these words throughout her childhood. Her grandfather had purchased this land when experts warned about its flood vulnerability. Her father had expanded during the farm crisis of the 1990s, when others fled agriculture. The Morgans had always been adaptable, resilient, forward thinkers. But this combination of repeated flooding, economic pressure, and the research facility closure presented challenges beyond anything they'd faced before. As dawn painted the eastern sky with reluctant light, Ellie walked to the window, looking out over their struggling fields. From this vantage point, she could see the stark contrast between the Morgan farm and the pristine, well-drained rectangles of agrotech industries. Corporate operation to the south. Their industrial drainage systems created a jarring boundary between thriving crops and the increasingly desperate struggle of family farms. Jenkins' place sold yesterday, Catherine said quietly, joining her daughter at the window. Agrotech's 9th acquisition this year. The Jenkins farm had been in operation since before the Morgans arrived in Pine Valley. 4 generations of agricultural knowledge erased by a signature on corporate letterhead. Sarah said they're moving to her brother's place in Michigan, Catherine added. Thomas is heartbroken about leaving the house his grandmother built. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The conversation was interrupted by the rumble of a vehicle outside. Through the window, they saw a sleek black SUV with corporate plates pulling up the driveway, kicking up gravel that had once been covered by fertile soil. Looks like we have a visitor, Catherine said, recognizing the Agrotech logo on the man's portfolio as he stepped out of the vehicle. Mr. Donovan again, Ellie muttered. 4th visit this month. Victor Donovan, Agrotech's acquisition manager, had become a regular presence in Pine Valley, systematically approaching struggling farmers with offers that grew more insistent with each visit. His corporate smile and practiced empathy barely masked the predatory nature of his mission. Ms. Morgan, he greeted as Catherine opened the door. I was hoping we might continue our conversation about your property's future. Catherine's expression remained neutral as she invited him in, decades of rural hospitality overriding her personal feelings about what he represented. Ellie remained standing as Donovan took a seat at the kitchen table, spreading documents from his leather portfolio. Agrotech has revised our offer, he began without preamble. In light of the research facility closure announcement and the Flood Authority's latest funding decisions, we feel this represents an extremely generous valuation of your property. Ellie glanced at the figure circled in bold on the top page. It was 30% higher than their last offer, which had already been substantial. Despite herself, she felt a moment of temptation. The amount would clear their debts, provide a comfortable cushion for her mother, and give her a fresh start somewhere else. As if reading her thoughts, Donovan continued, additionally, we've included a consulting position for you, Ms. Morgan. Our R&D department is quite impressed with your drainage innovations. We believe your expertise could benefit our sustainability initiatives across multiple properties. Ellie felt her mother's eyes on her but kept her attention on Donovan. And what happens to the land, to the community? Donovan's practiced smile didn't waver. Progress requires transition. Ms. Morgan, the economic benefits would flow directly to our shareholders, while Pine Valley becomes another corporate farming outpost with half the local employment and none of the community connection. Ellie finished for him. Donovan's smile tightened slightly. I understand your emotional attachment to traditional farming methods. Many families share that sentiment before recognizing the inevitable shift in agricultural economics. With the research facility closing, holding on to outdated models isn't just impractical. It's potentially devastating for your family's financial future. Catherine cleared her throat. We appreciate your concern for our financial well-being. Mr. Donovan, we'll review your offer and respond accordingly. Recognizing the diplomatic dismissal, Donovan gathered his documents. Please do, but keep in mind that with the facility closure proceeding and flood mitigation funding increasingly concentrated, this offer has an expiration date. Agricultural. Economics wait for no one, Ms. Morgan. After he departed, mother and daughter stood in silence for a long moment. That's enough to pay off the equipment loans and the mortgage, Catherine finally said. With some left over for you to start. Fresh somewhere with actual flood protection. Ellie ran a hand through her hair in frustration. And become another statistic in the corporate consolidation of American farming, another family legacy erased for quarterly profits. It's not surrender to recognize when the landscape has changed beyond our ability to adapt, Catherine countered, though her heart wasn't in the argument. They'd had variations of this conversation for months. Ellie's response was interrupted by the weather alert chime on her phone. She checked the notification, her expression growing concerned. The system's intensified, she said. Weather Service is now predicting clear skies until noon, then severe thunderstorms by early afternoon instead of evening. We need to secure everything we can. The approaching storm had been tracking for days, unusual for the region which had seen increasingly erratic weather patterns during the climate shift years. Forecasters were predicting potential flash flooding in a cruel irony after a brief dry spell that had given farmers false hope. I'll check the equipment shed, Catherine said, grateful for the shift to practical matters. You secure that experimental drainage system in the south field. As they moved to their tasks, the morning sky remained deceptively clear, but Ellie could feel the approaching front in the air pressure change. The distant rumble of thunderheads was still beyond the horizon, but moving quickly. Despite the danger the storm presented, Ellie worked methodically to protect the drainage prototype she'd been developing, the system that represented their best hope for making their land viable again. She was securing the last of the sensitive equipment when she heard something unusual above the gentle breeze, the struggling sound of an aircraft engine, sputtering and inconsistent. Ellie looked up, shading her eyes against the morning sun, and spotted a small plane flying unusually low. The aircraft was clearly in distress, its flight path erratic as it seemed to be searching for somewhere to land. Thinking quickly, Ellie ran to her truck and grabbed the emergency flare she kept for roadside breakdowns. The southeast field was their driest, recently cleared, and relatively flat, possibly the only suitable emergency landing spot for miles. She raced to the field, lit 2 flares, and began waving her bright orange work vest to catch the pilot's attention. The plane, which she now recognized as a military aircraft, a C-12 Huron transport, made another pass. Lower this time. Ellie could see the pilot struggling with the controls, the aircraft wobbling dangerously as it lined up with the field she was indicating. She positioned herself to mark the clearest approach path, using her knowledge of the land to guide the pilot toward the safest possible landing zone. With a sputtering roar, the C-12 descended toward the field, its landing gear extended. Ellie held her breath as the aircraft touched down hard, bouncing once before settling onto the uneven ground. It rolled for several hundred yards, kicking up dirt and debris before finally coming to a stop near the edge of the field, miraculously upright and seemingly intact. Ellie ran toward the aircraft, her heart pounding. As she approached, the side door opened, and a figure in a flight suit climbed out, moving with the stiff urgency of someone fighting through pain or injury. "Are you all right?" Ellie called out as she reached the plane. The pilot, a woman perhaps in her mid-40s with close-cropped hair, straightened her posture with visible effort. Thanks to you, I believe so. That was some quick thinking with those flares. Captain Maya Chun, United States Air Force, she introduced herself, extending a hand that Ellie noticed was trembling slightly from what must have been an adrenaline. Crash. And you are? Ellie Morgan. This is my family's farm you just landed on. Captain Chun nodded, glancing back at her aircraft with concern. I apologize for the unexpected arrival, Ms. Morgan. I experienced catastrophic electrical failure and couldn't reach the nearest airfield. Your signal saved both me and my cargo from a much worse fate. As if on cue, a series of urgent beeps emanated from inside the aircraft. Chun's expression shifted from relief to alarm. Is something wrong? Ellie asked. The captain hesitated, clearly weighing her response. I'm carrying sensitive research materials that require specific environmental conditions. The backup systems are failing now too. What kind of materials? Ellie asked, her curiosity piqued. I'm afraid that's classified, Chun replied professionally. But I need to contact my base immediately. The containment systems have limited battery backup. Ellie pulled out her phone, but the signal bars showed only a single flicker. Sal. Service is spotty here on a good day, and with that storm approaching. She gestured toward the darkening horizon where thunderclouds were now clearly visible. But we have a landline at the house, and a generator if the power goes out. Chun glanced at the aircraft, then back at the approaching storm front, making a quick decision. Lead the way, Ms. Morgan. I need to make that call urgently. As they walked toward the farmhouse, Ellie noticed Captain Chun repeatedly checking a small monitoring device attached to her wrist, her concern growing more evident with each glance. Whatever you're carrying must be important, Ellie observed. Chun gave her a measured look. Important enough that a recovery team will be dispatched immediately once I make contact. The research materials are part of a project that could significantly impact national security and, ironically, climate resilience. This caught Ellie's attention. Climate resilience? That's something we know a little about around here, though mostly from failing at it. They reached the farmhouse just as the first distant rumble of thunder sounded. Catherine emerged onto the porch, her expression shifting from concern to confusion at the sight of the uniformed Air Force officer accompanying her daughter. Mom, Ellie called as they hurried up the steps. This is Captain Chun. Her plane made an emergency landing in the southeast field. She needs to use our phone right away. Of course, Catherine responded, the instinctive hospitality of a farming family kicking in despite her surprise. Come inside, Captain. The phone's in the kitchen. As Chun made her urgent call, using authorization codes and technical terminology that meant nothing to the Morgans, Ellie explained the emergency landing to her mother in hushed tones. She says she's carrying classified research materials, Ellie whispered. Something to do with climate resilience and national security. Catherine's eyebrows rose in surprise. On a small transport plane landing in our field, that seems unlikely? Yeah, I thought so too, Ellie agreed. But she's definitely military, and whatever's in that plane has her seriously worried. Captain Chun finished her call and rejoined them, her professional demeanor slightly relaxed now. A recovery team is being dispatched immediately. They should arrive within 2 hours, barring complications from the approaching storm. 2 hours might be cutting it close, Ellie warned, checking the weather radar on her tablet. That system is moving faster than predicted. We could see heavy rain within 90 minutes. Chun frowned. The cargo requires stable temperature and minimal vibration. If the plane is buffeted by high winds or flooding occurs, what exactly is at risk here, Captain? Catherine asked directly. If we're harboring something dangerous on our property, we deserve to know. Chun studied them both for a moment, then came to a decision. What I'm about to tell you is classified, but given the circumstances, you deserve a partial explanation. I'm transporting experimental seed varieties developed at Eastridge Research Facility, bound for secure storage at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Seed varieties? Ellie repeated, surprised. From Eastridge? I thought they were working on energy technology. Their public research focus is energy, Chun confirmed. But they've also been developing drought and flood-resistant crop varieties as part of a national food security initiative. These seeds represent 5 years of advanced genetic research, plants that can thrive in extreme conditions, resist disease, and produce significantly higher yields with fewer resources. Ellie and Catherine exchanged glances, the implications immediately clear to them as farmers. And now that Eastridge is closing, you're moving the research elsewhere, Catherine concluded. Chun nodded. The seeds require specific containment protocols during transport. The environmental control systems in my aircraft are failing. If exposed to excessive heat, moisture, or vibration before reaching proper storage facilities, years of research could be lost. Ellie's mind was already racing with possibilities. These seeds, they're designed to withstand flooding like what we experience here. Among other climate extremes, yes, Chun confirmed. They represent a potential breakthrough in agricultural resilience. That's why they're considered a matter of national security, food supply stability in the face of climate change. Another rumble of thunder, closer now, punctuated their conversation. Ellie moved to the window, studying the approaching storm with a farmer's practiced eye. Your recovery team isn't going to make it before this hits, she said with certainty. And if that plane gets flooded while the containment systems are down, the research could be compromised, Chun finished grimly. Ellie turned back to face them, a determined expression on her face. Then we need to move your cargo somewhere. Secure until they arrive. That's against protocol, Chun objected. These materials are supposed to remain under direct military supervision at all times. Well, right now they're under the supervision of a failing electrical system in an aircraft that's about to get hit by a severe thunderstorm, Ellie countered. I'd say we're already off protocol, Captain. Catherine, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. What about the root cellar? It's temperature-controlled, reinforced, and stays dry even during the worst flooding. Chun looked torn between procedure and practicality. Another series of urgent beeps from her wrist monitor seemed to make the decision for her. The containment system is failing faster than anticipated, she admitted. We may not have a choice. I'll get the truck, Ellie said, already moving toward the door. Mom, can you prepare the cellar? Make sure the backup generator is connected in case we lose power. As Ellie drove her pickup to the landed aircraft, with Captain Chun riding beside her, the sky darkened ominously. The wind was picking up, carrying the electric scent of approaching rain. I'll need to document this deviation from protocol, Chun said, though her tone suggested she had accepted the necessity. Your assistance will be noted in my report. Ellie smiled slightly. Just doing what farmers do, adapting to conditions beyond our control. At the aircraft, Chun used her security credentials to access a reinforced compartment in the rear of the plane. Inside were several specialized containers, each about the size of a small cooler, with digital displays showing temperature and humidity readings. Some of these are already showing temperature fluctuations outside acceptable parameters, Chun sighed, checking each container with growing concern. We need to move quickly. Together, they carefully transferred the containers to Ellie's truck, securing them with straps and blankets to minimize vibration during transport. As they finished loading the last container, the first heavy raindrops began to fall, quickly transforming into a downpour. Just in time, Ellie shouted over the sudden roar of rain on the truck's roof. They climbed into the cab as lightning flashed overhead, followed almost instantly by a crack of thunder that shook the vehicle. Ellie navigated carefully back to the farmhouse, the truck's wheels occasionally slipping in the rapidly forming mud. By the time they reached the house, The rain was coming down in sheets, and the wind had intensified to concerning levels. Catherine met them at the door, helping to quickly transfer the containers into the house and down to the root cellar, a solid, concrete reinforced space beneath the main structure that had been designed specifically to withstand the region's flooding issues. The generator's ready if we lose power, Catherine confirmed as they arranged the containers on sturdy shelving. Temperature down here stays between 55 to 60 degrees year-round, and it's naturally dehumidified by the ventilation system my daughter designed. Chung was checking each container, adjusting settings and monitoring the environmental readings. This might actually work better than the failing systems on the aircraft, she admitted, sounding surprised. The temperature is stabilizing within acceptable parameters. Another crash of thunder reverberated above them, and the lights flickered momentarily before steadying again. Storms directly overhead now, Ellie observed. Your recovery team is going to have a rough time getting here in this. As if confirming her assessment, Chen's satellite phone rang. After a brief conversation, she turned to the Morgans with a grim expression. The recovery team has been delayed by flash flooding on the main access road. They're working on an alternative route, but estimate arrival has been pushed back by at least 3 hours. 3 hours puts us at the peak of the storm, Ellie said, checking the weather radar again on her tablet. They might not be able to land a helicopter in these conditions, and the roads could be impassable. Chun's professional composure showed signs of strain for the first time. These seed varieties represent a potential revolution in climate-adaptive agriculture. If they're compromised, they won't be, Catherine assured her firmly. This cellar has weathered worse storms than this. Your seeds are safe here. As they settled in for what might be a long wait, the storm's fury intensified above them. The power flickered repeatedly before finally failing completely, but as promised, the backup generator kicked in immediately, maintaining the essential systems. I'm curious, Captain, Ellie said as they monitored the seed containers together. If these seeds are so important, why transport them in a small aircraft instead of a more secure method? Chun hesitated before answering. The transfer wasn't supposed to be public knowledge. With Eastridge closing, there are competing interests who would very much like to acquire this research. Corporate interests? Catherine asked knowingly. Chun nodded. Several agricultural conglomerates have been attempting to gain access to this research through various channels. A quiet transfer with minimal personnel was deemed the lowest profile approach. Until you had to make an emergency landing on a family farm, Ellie noted with irony. Sometimes plans require adaptation, Chun replied, a hint of a smile breaking through her professional demeanor. Something farmers understand better than most, I imagine. As the hours passed, the storm continued unabated, but the seed containers remained stable in the carefully maintained environment of the root cellar. Ellie and Chun checked them regularly, making minor adjustments as needed, while Catherine monitored the generator and prepared food for their unexpected guest. During one of their monitoring sessions, Ellie's curiosity got the better of her. These seeds, what makes them so special? Beyond being flood and drought resistant? Chun studied her for a moment, seemingly weighing how much to share. The varieties include staple crops modified to thrive in precisely the conditions that are destroying farms. Like yours, repeated flooding cycles followed by intense dry periods. They require minimal fertilizer, resist multiple pathogens, and can produce yields up to 40% higher than conventional varieties. That could change everything for farms in regions like ours, Ellie said, the implications sinking in. If small farmers had access to them. That's part of the complexity, Chun admitted. There's significant debate about how this research should be deployed. Some argue it should be controlled by major agricultural corporations with the infrastructure to maximize distribution. Others believe it should be made available to small farmers first, particularly in vulnerable regions. Let me guess which side the corporations are on, Catherine said dryly as she joined them with fresh coffee. Chun accepted a mug gratefully. The debate is still ongoing. No final decisions have been made about distribution models. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the house above them, followed by a concerning creaking sound. That didn't sound good, Ellie said, moving toward the stairs. I should check the upper levels. When she returned several minutes later, she was soaking wet and looking worried. Part of the roof over the east wing is threatening to give way. Mom, we need to move the emergency tarps into position before we lose the whole section. I'll help, Chun offered immediately, setting down her coffee. You don't have to, Catherine began. I've had emergency response training, Chun interrupted. And you're protecting my cargo. Please let me assist. Together, the three women battled the storm, working to secure the compromised section of roof with heavy-duty tarps and ropes. The wind tore at them mercilessly, the rain reducing visibility to mere feet, but they worked methodically, communicating with shouts and hand signals when necessary. Despite their efforts, water began seeping into the east wing, threatening to spread to other parts of the house. Ellie quickly implemented an impromptu drainage system, using plastic sheeting and buckets to channel the water away from critical areas. Captain Chun, despite being out of her element, proved remarkably adaptable, following Ellie's instructions precisely and offering practical suggestions drawn from her emergency management training. Catherine, watching them work together, noted the unexpected synergy between the military officer and her farmer daughter, both women, accustomed to solving problems under pressure with whatever resources were available. As they finally managed to stabilize the situation, all three soaked to the skin and exhausted, Chun's satellite phone rang again. After a brief conversation, she turned to the Morgans with relief evident in her expression. The recovery team has found an alternate route. They'll be here within 30 minutes. The storm intensity is expected to decrease temporarily, giving them a window for safe approach. Sure enough, the wind and rain began to lessen slightly, though the respite seemed temporary as darker clouds were visible on the horizon, promising a second wave of the storm system. As they changed into dry clothes, Catherine providing Chun with some of Ellie's spare work clothes, Ellie found herself reflecting on the strange circumstances that had brought a military aircraft carrying revolutionary seed research to their struggling farm. There was something almost poetic about it, as if the land itself had drawn these seeds back to the very type of place they were designed to save. Your farm is quite impressive, Chun remarked as they returned to check on the seed containers one final time. Despite the challenges you're facing, your innovations for flood management show remarkable ingenuity. Necessity drives innovation, Ellie replied with a shrug. When you can't afford industrial-scale solutions, you learn to work with what you have. Chun studied her thoughtfully. That perspective is increasingly valuable, Ms. Morgan. The ability to create effective solutions with limited resources is precisely what future agricultural resilience will require. Before Ellie could respond, they heard the distinct sound of multiple vehicles approaching, heavy-duty military transport trucks by the sound of their engines. The recovery team had arrived. What happened next transformed an already extraordinary day into something that would change the course of Pine Valley forever, though none of them could have predicted it as they climbed the cellar stairs to greet the approaching convoy. The convoy of military vehicles pulled into the Morgan farm's muddy driveway with precision despite the challenging conditions. Through the lessening rain, Ellie could make out 4 armored transport trucks, 2 Humvees, and what appeared to be a mobile laboratory unit. The scale of the response seemed disproportionate for a simple seed transfer, reinforcing her suspicion that whatever Captain Chun was transporting held truly extraordinary significance. A woman in a colonel's uniform emerged from the lead vehicle, her authoritative presence evident even from a distance. As she approached the farmhouse, Captain Chun stepped forward to meet her, snapping to attention despite her borrowed civilian clothes. "Colonel Reeves," Chun greeted formally. "Thank you for the prompt response given the conditions." "Colonel." Samantha Reeves surveyed the situation with a quick, practiced assessment. "At ease, Captain. I understand we have a situation with the research materials." Her gaze shifted to Ellie and Catherine, standing nearby. "And these civilians have been assisting?" "Yes, ma'am," Chun confirmed. "Ellie and Catherine Morgan. This is their farm where I was forced to land. They provided secure storage for the containers when the aircraft systems failed. Without their assistance, the integrity of the research materials would have been compromised." Colonel Reeves studied the Morgan women with new interest. "Is that so? Then we owe you a debt of gratitude." She extended her hand. "Colonel Samantha Reeves, Advanced Agricultural Research Division. Your assistance in this matter is appreciated." Ellie shook the offered hand, noting the colonel's firm grip and direct gaze. "We did what anyone would do in the circumstances. The captain needed help, and we had a suitable storage solution. Not everyone has a temperature-controlled root cellar designed to withstand flooding," Chun pointed out. "Or the knowledge to properly maintain environmental conditions for sensitive materials." Reeves raised an eyebrow. "Indeed. Now, if you'll direct us to these materials, we'll begin transfer procedures immediately. Our window in this storm system is limited." As Ellie led them to the root cellar, military personnel began unloading specialized equipment from the mobile lab unit. The team worked with practiced efficiency, scanning each container before carefully transferring them to the climate-controlled transport vehicle. "These readings are surprisingly stable," one of the technicians remarked, checking the environmental monitors. "Better than we anticipated given the circumstances." "Credit for that goes to Ms. Morgan's cellar design," Chun said. "The natural temperature regulation and humidity control proved highly effective." Colonel Reeves, who had been observing the operation with careful attention, turned to Ellie with increased interest. "You designed this storage system yourself?" "Necessity is a powerful motivator," Ellie replied. "When you're fighting constant flooding, you either adapt or you lose everything." "Speaking of which," Catherine interjected, glancing anxiously at the sky where the second wave of the storm was visibly approaching, "that next front is going to hit within 30 minutes. Your window is closing fast." Reeves checked her tactical weather display and nodded sharply. "Accelerate the transfer," she ordered her team. "Priority 1 containers first." As the military personnel increased their pace, Ellie noticed something unusual about the final container being removed from the cellar. Unlike the others, this one had additional security measures, including a biometric lock and what appeared to be its own independent power supply. "That one's different," she observed quietly to Captain Chun, who had remained beside her during the operation. Chun hesitated before responding. "It contains the crown jewels of the research, the master genetic templates from which all other varieties are developed. Its value is incalculable." The last container was just being secured in the MIB transport vehicle when the wind suddenly intensified, bringing with it a new deluge of rain. The storm's second front had arrived earlier than predicted, with even greater fury than the first. "Move out now," Colonel Reeves commanded, her voice cutting through the rising howl of the wind. "Captain Chun, gather your personal effects. We're evacuating you as well." Chun turned to Ellie and Catherine. "You should come with us. This storm is intensifying beyond forecasts. The structural damage to your house could worsen." Catherine shook her head firmly. "This farm has been in our family for generations. We don't abandon it during storms." "We've weathered worse," Ellie added, though the increasing violence of the wind gave her pause. "We'll shelter in the cellar if necessary." A tremendous crack suddenly split the air, not thunder, but the sound of splintering wood. A massive oak tree at the edge of the driveway was giving way, its water-saturated roots no longer able to hold in the soft-knit soil. "Look out!" Ellie shouted, but it was too late. The ancient tree crashed down across the driveway, blocking the convoy's exit path and crushing the hood of one of the Humvees. Thankfully, no one was inside. Colonel Reeves assessed the situation immediately. Matthews Ramirez, damage report on that vehicle. Singh, get the chainsaw equipment. We need that tree cleared within 10 minutes. But as her team moved to respond, a new danger presented itself. The drainage ditches Ellie had dug around the property were already overflowing, and a surge of water was now rushing toward the low-lying area where the convoy was positioned. The road will be underwater in minutes, Ellie warned, recognizing the pattern from previous floods. And that's not just water. There's debris coming with it. Your heavy vehicles might make it through, but they could be damaged. Reeves turned to her communications officer. Satellite imagery. I need an alternate evacuation route immediately. The officer shook his head after checking his equipment. All surrounding access roads show flooding, Colonel. We're effectively cut off until the water recedes. For the first time, Reeves's composed demeanor showed signs of genuine concern. She turned to Ellie. Miss Morgan, given your knowledge of the local topography, what options do we have? Ellie thought quickly, mentally mapping the property and surrounding areas. There's higher ground about half a mile east of here. The old barn sits on a natural rise that's never flooded in living memory. The path there is narrow but should support your vehicles if we move now, before it gets washed out. Reeves made her decision immediately. Lead the way, Miss Morgan. All units prepare to relocate. Priority on the research materials transport. What followed was a tense journey through rapidly deteriorating conditions. Ellie rode in the lead vehicle with Colonel Reeves and Captain Chun, directing them along a barely visible farm track that wound through the eastern fields toward the weathered structure of the old barn. The military vehicles struggled against increasing water levels and muddy terrain, their powerful engines straining as rain continued to lash against them with horizontal force. 300 yards ahead, Ellie shouted over the storm's roar. The ground starts to rise just past that line of trees. As they cleared the tree line, the old barn came into view, its solid timber frame standing resolute against the storm on its elevated position. Built by Ellie's grandfather using Old World techniques, the structure had been designed specifically to serve as a refuge during the region's worst flooding events. The convoy reached the barn just as the lower fields became completely submerged. Inside, the spacious interior provided ample room for the vehicles and personnel. More importantly, it offered protection for the precious cargo they carried. Secure the perimeter, Colonel Reeves ordered as her team quickly established an operational base within the barn. Set up the portable lab in the northwest corner. I want continuous monitoring of all containers. As the military personnel transformed the old barn into a high-tech command center, Ellie found herself watching with a mixture of amazement and amusement. The contrast between the weathered timber beams overhead and the advanced equipment, now humming below, created a striking juxtaposition of past and future. Your grandfather built this? Captain Chun asked, joining her by one of the large doors, where they watched the storm's continued assault on the landscape. Ellie nodded, by hand mostly. Said he wanted something that would still be standing long after he was gone. He'd be pleased to see it serving such an important purpose. It's remarkable craftsmanship, Chun observed. The positioning on this rise shows impressive foresight. He studied the land for years before choosing this spot, Ellie explained. Said the old-timers knew where to build by watching where the water went, not where it was when things were dry. Their conversation was interrupted by Colonel Reeves, who approached with purpose in her stride. Ms. Morgan, our meteorological team is projecting this storm system will intensify further before moving on. We may be stationed here for up to 48 hours. You're welcome to shelter here as long as needed, Ellie replied. The structure is sound. I appreciate that, Reeves said with a nod. However, we have another concern. The power requirements for maintaining our containment systems are substantial. Our emergency generators have limited fuel supplies that may not last the duration. Ellie considered this new challenge. There's a micro-hydro system I installed on the creek that runs along the eastern property line. If it hasn't been damaged by the flooding, it could provide supplementary power. Reeves looked impressed despite herself. You installed a hydroelectric system on your farm? On a small scale, yes, Ellie confirmed. Part of my ongoing experiments in resource independence. It's not enough to power the whole farm, but it might help extend your generator fuel. I'd like to see this system, Reeves decided. Captain Chun, accompany us. Lieutenant Wang, you have command until we return. Despite Catherine's protests about the danger, Ellie led Colonel Reeves and Captain Chun through the continuing storm to inspect the micro-hydro installation. They traversed the property using a utility ATV equipped with oversized tires designed for muddy conditions. Ellie navigating by memory through areas where landmarks had disappeared under rising water. The creek, normally a gentle flow, had transformed into a rushing torrent, which, ironically, made the turbine system more productive than usual. To Ellie's relief, her weatherproofed installation had survived intact, the reinforced housing protecting the generator components, while the water wheel spun rapidly in the accelerated current. Impressive improvisation, Colonel Reeves remarked, examining the system with genuine interest. This isn't standard commercial equipment. Built it from modified irrigation components and parts salvaged from old farm machinery, Ellie explained, raising her voice over the roar of the water. It's not pretty, but it works. Function over form, Reeves nodded approvingly. A principle the military appreciates. They carefully connected a portable power storage unit from the colonel's equipment to Ellie's system, creating a way to transport the generated electricity back to the barn. As they worked together, Ellie found herself intrigued by Reeves's unexpected technical knowledge. This was clearly not a desk officer, but someone with hands-on engineering experience. You know your way around electrical systems, Colonel, Ellie observed as they completed the final connections. Reeves allowed herself a small smile. Before commanding the Agricultural Research Division, I led engineering units in disaster response scenarios worldwide. Improvised power solutions were often the difference between success and failure. As they secured the equipment for transport back to the barn, the storm's intensity seemed to peak, the wind howling with renewed fury and the rain coming down in sheets so dense they could barely see a few feet ahead. We need to move now, Ellie shouted, securing the power unit to the ATV. This area could flash flood at any minute. They had barely started back when Ellie's prediction proved correct. A surge of water suddenly rushed down from the higher ground to the north, cutting across their planned return path. Ellie quickly changed direction, guiding them along a different route that wound around the eastern edge of the property. The barn is still accessible from this direction, she assured them, but we'll need to cross that wooden bridge ahead. It's sturdy, but with this water level, we need to move quickly. The bridge in question, a simple but solid structure Ellie had built herself to span a normally insignificant drainage ditch, was now being tested by a raging flow of water that reached nearly to its wooden planks. As they approached, Ellie could see the structure shuddering under the force of debris hitting its supports. I'll go first to test it, she decided, not giving the others time to object. If it holds the ATV, it should support us all. Carefully she guided the vehicle onto the bridge, feeling it shift slightly beneath them. Halfway across, a sickening crack sounded from below as one of the support beams gave way, causing the bridge to tilt dramatically to one side. Hold on, Ellie shouted, gunning the engine. The ATV lurched forward just as the bridge structure began to collapse behind them, the rear wheels barely clearing the failing span before it was torn away by the surging water. They made it to solid ground on the far side, all three clinging to the ATV and each other, soaked and mud-splattered, but intact. The precious power unit, securely strapped down, had survived the harrowing crossing as well. That was... Captain Chun began, trying to catch her breath. Exemplary driving under extreme conditions, Colonel Reeves finished, her composed demeanor briefly showing genuine admiration. Your knowledge of this land just saved us from a dangerous situation, Ms. Morgan. They continued their journey. Back to the barn, forced to take an even more circuitous route as additional areas succumbed to the flooding. By the time they finally reached the relative safety of the elevated structure, all three were exhausted, soaked to the skin, and covered in mud. The military personnel inside reacted immediately, providing dry clothes and hot drinks while technicians eagerly connected the power unit to their equipment, relieving the strain on their generators. Your micro-hydro system is providing 30% of our power requirements, a technical officer reported to Colonel Reeves after completing the integration. That extends our operational capability significantly. As the evening progressed, the storm showed no signs of abating. The military team established a rotation for monitoring both the research materials and the evolving weather conditions. Catherine, who had been helping organize food preparation using the emergency supplies the Morgan family kept stored in the barn, approached Ellie with concern. "The creek is still rising," she said quietly. "If it overtops the eastern berm, the lower fields will be completely submerged. We could lose this year's entire planting." Ellie nodded grimly. "I know, but there's nothing we can do until this passes. At least the house and barn are on high enough ground to survive." "Ms. Morgan," Colonel Reeves interrupted, having overheard their conversation, "may I have a word with you privately?" Curious, Ellie followed the colonel to a makeshift office area that had been set up in a corner of the barn. Captain Chun joined them, carrying a secure tablet device. "I've been reviewing the satellite imagery of your property." Reeves began without preamble, displaying a real-time view of the Morgan farm overlaid with topographical data. "Your drainage innovations are quite remarkable given your limited resources." "Thank you," Ellie replied cautiously, uncertain where this was heading. "However," Reeves continued, "I believe we might be able to assist with your immediate flooding concerns." She gestured to the tablet, where a simulation was now running. "If we deploy our portable pump systems at these 3 strategic locations, we could potentially divert enough water to save approximately 60% of your currently threatened fields." Ellie stared at the simulation in surprise. "You would do that? Use military equipment to help save our crops? Consider it a fair exchange for your assistance with our mission," Reeves replied matter-of-factly. "Additionally, the practical demonstration of flood mitigation techniques would provide valuable field data relevant to our research objectives." Captain Chun smiled slightly. "What the colonel means is that helping your farm aligns with our broader mission of agricultural resilience." Ellie studied the proposed intervention points carefully. "This could work, but you'd need someone who knows the exact topography of those locations. Some of your indicated points have underwater obstacles that won't show on satellite imagery." "Which is why I'm requesting your guidance," Reeves stated. "Captain Chun will lead the deployment team if you're willing to assist." Despite Catherine's concerns about Ellie venturing out again in the storm, the potential to save even a portion of their crops was too significant to ignore. Within the hour, Ellie found herself in a military-grade amphibious vehicle, guiding Captain Chun and a team of 4 specialists to the first deployment location. The specialized pumping equipment was unlike anything Ellie had seen before, compact but extraordinarily powerful, with advanced filtration systems to prevent debris from causing clogs. As they worked together to position and activate the first pump, Chun explained its origins. "This was originally developed for flood response in urban environments," she said as they secured the unit against the powerful water flow. "But we modified it for agricultural applications as part of our broader resilience program." By midnight, all 3 pumping stations were operational, already making a visible difference in the water levels, threatening the Morgan's main crop fields. The team returned to the barn, exhausted but successful, to find Colonel Reeves engaged in an intense conversation via satellite communication. "Understood," they overheard her saying. "We'll proceed with Security Protocol Delta and await further instructions." As she ended the call, Reeves noticed Ellie watching, and her expression shifted slightly, a momentary glimpse of something that might have been concern before her professional mask returned. "Is everything all right, Colonel?" Ellie asked. "A developing situation," Reeves replied carefully. "Nothing that impacts our current operations." She changed the subject smoothly. "How did the pump deployment proceed?" "Successfully," Chun reported. "All units are functioning at optimal capacity." Ms. Morgan's guidance proved invaluable for proper positioning. As the night progressed, the storm's fury finally began to diminish, though the flooding remained severe. The military team maintained their vigilant monitoring of both the research materials and the pumping operations, while Ellie and Catherine managed to get some rest in a corner of the barn that had been set up with cots. Ellie woke shortly before dawn to find Captain Chun standing by one of the barn doors, watching the first faint light reveal the transformed landscape outside. The rain had finally stopped, though dark clouds still hung low overhead. "It looks like an inland sea," Chun observed as Ellie joined her. Indeed, much of the lower valley was submerged, with only the tops of trees and occasional rooflines breaking the water's surface. However, thanks to the military's pumping intervention, the Morgan's main fields remained partially above water, a small island of hope in the midst of devastation. "Your farm is better positioned than most," Chun noted. "Your drainage innovations made a significant difference." "Not enough of a difference," Ellie replied, thinking of their neighbors who lacked similar protections. "Most small farms in this valley won't survive another flood like this. Agrotech will swoop in with acquisition offers that desperate people can't refuse." Chun was quiet for a moment before speaking carefully. "The seeds we're transporting could change that equation, you know. They're specifically designed to thrive in post-flood soil conditions and recover faster than conventional crops." Ellie turned to look at her directly. "And who gets access to these miracle seeds? Corporate operations like Agrotech or family farms like ours who are fighting to survive?" Before Chun could respond, they were interrupted by a communications officer. "Captain, Colonel Reeves requests your presence immediately." In the command area, they found Reeves studying a newly arrived intelligence report, her expression grave. She looked up as they approached. "We have a situation developing," she announced without preamble. "Intelligence indicates that information about our cargo may have been compromised. A private security team employed by Biogen Agricultural Enterprises has been detected moving into the area, presumably searching for our convoy." "Biogen?" Ellie repeated. "They're Agrotech's parent company." Reeves nodded sharply. "Exactly, and they have a very significant interest in the research materials we're transporting." Our communications blackout during the storm provided an opportunity they appear to be exploiting. "How would they even know about the seeds?" Ellie asked, confused. "Corporate espionage is unfortunately common in advanced agricultural research," Chun explained. "The economic potential of these seed varieties makes them an irresistible target." Colonel Reeves turned to her communications officer. "Status on extraction support?" "Still delayed, ma'am," the officer reported. "Flooding has affected all major access routes, and the nearest viable landing zone for air extraction is currently compromised. Earliest potential support is approximately 6 hours out." Reeves considered this information, her tactical mind visibly working through scenarios. Finally, she turned to Ellie. "Ms. Morgan, it appears we may need your assistance once more. Your knowledge of this land may prove crucial in the coming hours. Are you willing to help us ensure these research materials don't fall into corporate hands?" Ellie didn't hesitate. Absolutely. What do you need me to do? What Ellie didn't yet realize was that her decision would not only determine the fate of the precious cargo they were protecting, but would ultimately transform the future of Pine Valley and family farms throughout the region in ways none of them could have imagined. Colonel Reeves spread a detailed topographical map across the makeshift command table, weighted at the corners with equipment components. The map showed the Morgan farm and surrounding areas, with flood zones highlighted in blue shading that unfortunately covered most of the region. Biogen's security team was last spotted here. Reeves indicated a point about 7 miles southwest of their position. They appear to be conducting a systematic search pattern moving northward. At their current pace, they'll reach this area within 3 hours. How many personnel? Captain Chun asked, studying the map intently. Intelligence. Estimates 12 to 15 operatives, heavily equipped, traveling in specialized all-terrain vehicles, Reeves replied. They're presenting themselves as a private rescue and recovery team responding to the flood emergency. Ellie frowned, leaning over the map. That's a clever cover. After a disaster like this, nobody questions unfamiliar vehicles or personnel offering assistance. Precisely, Reeves nodded. And with legitimate emergency services overwhelmed, there's minimal verification of credentials. What's our plan? Ellie asked directly. You mentioned my knowledge of the land could help. Reeves straightened, her decision already made. We need to relocate the research materials before Biogen's team can trace our position. A direct confrontation would create complications we prefer to avoid. Not to mention potential damage to the seeds, Chun added. Even in their containment units, they remain vulnerable to excessive vibration or impact. Ellie studied the map carefully, her mind working through possible routes and hiding places. Growing up on this land, she knew every rise and depression, every hidden path and natural barrier. Finally, she pointed to a location about 3 miles northeast of their current position. Here, the old Willis mining tunnels. They were abandoned decades ago but remained structurally sound the last time I explored them. The entrance is well concealed, accessible by a single narrow path that's easily defensible, and the interior maintains a stable temperature year-round. Most importantly, it's on high ground that won't flood. Colonel Reeves examined the indicated location with interest. These tunnels don't appear on our maps. They wouldn't, Ellie explained. They were part of a small-scale operation in the 1940s, before modern mapping. Local farmers used them for cold storage for years afterward, but most people have forgotten. They exist. My grandfather showed them to me when I was a child. Reeves exchanged glances with Captain Chun. Satellite thermal imaging confirms a consistent cool temperature signature at that location, Chun noted, checking her tablet. It's consistent with subsurface structures. The Biogen team will be focusing on official roads and visible structures, Ellie continued. The path to the tunnels cuts across private land and would appear impassable to anyone who doesn't know the specific route. After a moment's consideration, Reeves nodded decisively. Very well. We'll relocate the critical research materials to these tunnels while maintaining a visible presence here as a diversion. Captain Chun will lead the transport team with Ms. Morgan's guidance. I'll remain with the main force to coordinate with incoming extraction support. The next hour was a flurry of careful preparation. The most sensitive containers, including the special unit with the master genetic templates, were prepared for transport in 2 of the smaller, more maneuverable vehicles. Ellie worked with Chun to plan their route, identifying key landmarks that would be visible despite the flooding. Catherine pulled her daughter aside as the preparations neared completion. Are you sure about this, Ellie? Getting involved with corporate espionage and military operations wasn't exactly on our farm management plan. Ellie smiled slightly at her mother's attempt at humor, despite the concern in her eyes. I'm sure, Mom. These seeds could change everything, not just for us, but for every small farm facing the same challenges. If they fall into Biogen's hands, they'll become just another tool for corporate consolidation. Catherine studied. Her daughter's determined expression, so reminiscent of her late father's when he'd set his mind to something. "Your father would be proud," she said finally. "He always said true innovation belongs in the hands of those who work the land, not those who merely profit from it." The transport team departed as the first hints of morning sunlight broke through the clouds. 2 modified Humvees carrying the precious cargo, with Captain Chun commanding the lead vehicle and Ellie navigating. 4 military personnel provided security, armed but with weapons concealed to maintain their low profile. Their route took them through the most challenging terrain, deliberately avoiding obvious paths that Biogen's team might monitor. Ellie guided them across a series of partially submerged fields, through a narrow passage between flooded woodlands, and finally up a barely perceptible track that wound through rocky terrain toward higher ground. "This doesn't look passable," Chun observed as they approached what appeared to be a solid wall of brush and fallen trees at the base of a rocky outcrop. "It's not meant to," Ellie replied with a slight smile. "Why are you really here, Mr. Donovan? This isn't exactly standard procedure for land acquisition." Something shifted in Donovan's demeanor, the corporate veneer falling away completely to reveal a harder, more calculating personality beneath. "Let's dispense with the games, Ms. Morgan. I know what was on that military transport that made an emergency landing on your farm. Biogen has been tracking that research for years." "I don't know what you're talking about," Ellie maintained. But Donovan cut her off with a dismissive gesture. "The adaptive seed varieties from Eastridge. The ones that could make flood-prone land not just viable but premium agricultural real estate." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Those seeds could transform everything. Ms. Morgan, the companies that control them will determine the future of global agriculture." "And that should be Biogen, I suppose?" Ellie challenged. "It should be whoever can deploy them most effectively," Donovan countered. "The research cost billions to develop." "Do you really think small family farms have the resources to utilize this technology properly?" Ellie stood her ground. "What I think is that agricultural innovation should serve people and communities, not just corporate balance sheets." Donovan sighed as if disappointed by her naivety. "Noble sentiments. But the reality is that Biogen will acquire this technology one way or another. The only question is whether you benefit from cooperating or suffer from opposing us." His hand moved slightly, revealing the outline of what appeared to be a weapon beneath his jacket. "Now, where are the seeds, Ms. Morgan?" Before Ellie could respond, a calm voice spoke from behind Donovan. "That's far enough, Mr. Donovan." Captain Chun had emerged silently from concealment, her sidearm held steadily at her side, visible but not directly threatening. 2 of her team had also appeared, positioned strategically around the area. Donovan tensed but made no sudden moves, clearly reassessing his situation. "Captain," he acknowledged with forced politeness, "this is a misunderstanding. I was simply having a conversation with Ms. Morgan about flood recovery efforts. A conversation that included veiled threats and corporate espionage implications," Chun replied evenly. "I think we should continue this discussion with Colonel Reeves and our legal team present, don't you?" For a moment, it seemed Donovan might attempt something desperate, but survival instinct prevailed. With military personnel now visible on all sides, he slowly raised his hands in a gesture of compliance. "Biogen has legitimate interest in this research," he said stiffly. "We have shareholders to consider." "Duly noted," Chun replied. "Your concerns will be registered along with your methods of pursuing them." Under Chun's direction, the team secured Donovan and confiscated his communication devices. A quick check confirmed he had indeed been in contact with the larger Biogen security force, reporting suspicious activity in this area. "They'll be coming this way soon," Chun informed Ellie quietly. "We need to move again, quickly." Ellie's Mind raced, considering options. The tunnels had been their best hiding place, but now they needed something less obvious, somewhere Biogen wouldn't think to search. "I have an idea," she said finally. "But it's going to require trust on both sides." Within 30 minutes, they had loaded the seed containers back into their vehicles and were following Ellie along an even more obscure route, a barely visible track that wound through a series of limestone formations before descending toward what appeared to be a dead end at a cliff face. Before Chun could question their direction, Ellie guided them through a narrow passage that revealed itself only at the last moment, leading to a concealed grotto with a small but remarkably clear pond at its center. "My secret place," Ellie explained as they carefully parked the vehicles where they couldn't be seen from outside. "I found it as a teenager. As far as I know, no one else has been here in decades. The natural formation created a perfect hiding spot, cool, sheltered, with multiple exit points through narrow passages and a water source. Most importantly, it was completely absent from any maps and invisible to aerial surveillance due to the overhanging rock formations." "This is perfect," Chun acknowledged, directing her team to establish a secure position. "But how do we prevent Donovan from revealing our previous location once his team finds him?" "That's where my idea comes in," Ellie replied. "We let them find something, just not what they're expecting." She outlined her plan quickly. Using one of the empty transport cases they'd brought as a decoy, they would create the impression that the seeds had been moved elsewhere, specifically toward the extraction point where Colonel Reeves was coordinating with incoming support. By leaving subtle but discoverable tracks, they could direct Biogen's attention away from their actual location. "Misdirection," Chun nodded approvingly. "Military tactic as old as warfare itself." They implemented the plan immediately, with 2 team members creating the false trail while the rest secured their actual position. Donovan, secured but unharmed, was left where his team would eventually find him with his communication devices subtly altered to show fragments of coordinates leading toward the false location. As they settled into their new hiding place, monitoring equipment set up and security established, Ellie found a moment to examine the tranquil grotto more carefully. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the rock ceiling, creating dappled patterns on the clear water. Despite the chaos and danger outside, this hidden pocket of nature remained peaceful, untouched by flooding or corporate machinations. "It's beautiful," Chung commented, joining her by the water's edge. "How did you find it?" "By accident," Ellie admitted. "I was having a particularly difficult day, arguing with my father about college plans versus staying on the farm. I just started walking, not caring where I ended up, and somehow found my way here." She smiled at the memory. "It became my thinking place. Whenever I faced a seemingly impossible problem, I'd come here to clear my head." Chun nodded understanding. "And did you go to college?" "Agricultural engineering at State," Ellie confirmed. "Then came back to implement what I'd learned. My father was right about education, and I was right about not abandoning the farm. We both just needed time to see the bigger picture." Their conversation was interrupted by an incoming communication from Colonel Reeves. Chun moved quickly to the secure equipment to receive the transmission. "Status update, Captain." Reeves's voice came through clearly. "Biogen forces have departed our location, moving rapidly southeast, away from your position. It appears your diversion was successful. Extraction support will reach our coordinates within 60 minutes. Then proceed to your location using the route data you provided." "Understood, Colonel," Chun responded. "All research materials remain secure and stable. We'll prepare for transfer upon your arrival." As Chun ended the communication, a subtle shift in her demeanor caught Ellie's attention. "There's something else, isn't there?" she asked. "Something Reeves didn't mention over the channel." Chun hesitated, then nodded slightly. "The Colonel has been engaged in high-level communications with the research Oversight Committee while coordinating our extraction. There are developments regarding the deployment of this technology. What kind of developments? Ellie pressed. I'm not at liberty to share specifics, Chun replied carefully. But Colonel Reeves has been advocating strongly for a particular distribution model that aligns with her views on agricultural resilience. Before Ellie could inquire further, one of the security teams signaled from his observation position. The extraction force was approaching, having navigated the concealed route Ellie had mapped for them. As they prepared for the arrival of Colonel Reeves and the extraction team, Ellie found herself contemplating the seeds they'd been protecting, tiny embodiments of potential that could transform agriculture forever. Whether that transformation would benefit communities like Pine Valley or accelerate their decline into corporate farming zones remained to be seen. What she didn't yet realize was that her actions during this crisis had already set in motion changes that would reshape not just her farm's future, but the entire relationship between military research and rural communities throughout the region. The extraction team arrived with impressive efficiency, specialized vehicles navigating the concealed approach to the grotto, with Colonel Reeves personally leading the convoy. As military personnel established a secure perimeter, Ellie watched the practiced precision with which they transferred the seed containers to armored transport units designed specifically for their protection. Colonel Reeves approached Ellie. While overseeing the operation, her expression revealing a new respect that hadn't been present during their initial interactions. Ms. Morgan, Captain Chun informs me that your knowledge of the local terrain was instrumental in evading Biogen security forces. The research materials remain secure largely due to your assistance. I just showed you places I've known my whole life, Ellie replied modestly. Anyone who grew up farming this land would know its secrets. That's precisely my point, Reeves said, her tone shifting to something more thoughtful. Local knowledge, the deep understanding that comes from generations working the same land, isn't something that can be replicated by satellite imagery or corporate efficiency models. Before Ellie could respond, a communications officer approached, requesting the colonel's immediate attention for an encrypted transmission. From Washington. Reeves excused herself, moving to the secure communications equipment they'd established in a corner of the grotto. Captain Chun joined Ellie as they watched the final preparations for transport. Once these containers are loaded, we'll be departing immediately, she explained. The extraction route has been secured, and we have air support standing by if needed. And Biogen's team? Ellie asked. Still pursuing our decoy trail, Chun replied with a hint of satisfaction. By the time they realize they've been misdirected, the seeds will be secured at a military research facility. Ellie nodded, feeling a complicated mix of relief and uncertainty. The immediate crisis was ending, but the larger questions about the seed's future remained unanswered. She watched as the specialized container housing the master genetic templates, the one Chun had called the crown jewels, was carefully loaded into the most heavily armored vehicle. What happens to them now? She finally asked. Once they reach your facility? Chun glanced toward Colonel Reeves, who was still engaged in her secure communication, then replied carefully. The official protocol calls for secure storage, pending final determination of deployment strategy by the Oversight Committee, which means corporate interests like Biogen will continue lobbying for exclusive access, Ellie concluded. That is one possibility, Chun acknowledged, but not the only one. Their conversation was interrupted as Colonel Reeves rejoined them, her expression revealing nothing of the communication she'd just concluded. Final preparations are complete, she announced. We depart in 5 minutes. As the team made final security checks, Reeves turned to Ellie with an unexpected question. Miss Morgan, would you be willing to accompany us to our facility? Ellie blinked in surprise. Me? Why? I believe your perspective would be valuable during the debriefing process, Reeves replied. particularly regarding the practical applications of this research in flood-affected agricultural communities. There was something in the colonel's tone, a subtle emphasis that suggested more significance to this invitation than was immediately apparent. Ellie glanced at Chun, who gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "I'd need to let my mother know," Ellie said, still processing the request. "Already arranged," Reeves informed her. Captain Chun took the liberty of extending the invitation to Catherine Morgan as well. "She's being escorted here now and will arrive shortly." Indeed, within minutes, Catherine appeared, accompanied by 2 military personnel. After a brief reunion with her daughter, she regarded Colonel Reeves with open curiosity. "My daughter seems to have made quite an impression," Catherine observed. "Though I'm still unclear on why our presence is requested at your facility. All will be explained during transport, Mrs. Morgan," Reeves assured her. "But I can tell you that your family's agricultural expertise has become relevant to national interests in ways we didn't anticipate before this emergency." With preparations complete, the convoy departed the grotto, following a carefully planned extraction route that avoided both flooded areas and potential biogen interception points. Ellie and Catherine rode in the command vehicle with Colonel Reeves and Captain Chun. Their conversation initially focused on practical matters of navigation and the continuing flood conditions throughout the valley. Once they reached the main highway, largely clear of floodwaters thanks to its elevated construction, Reeves signaled for the convoy to maintain standard speed and security protocols. With the immediate danger of pursuit reduced, she turned her attention to the Morgan women. "Now that we have a moment of relative security," she began, "I can explain more fully why your presence has been requested. The Oversight Committee for the Adaptive Agriculture Initiative has been engaged in a fundamental policy debate since the program's inception 5 years ago." "What kind of debate?" Catherine asked directly. "Distribution and implementation," Reeves replied. "Specifically, whether these advanced seed varieties should be channeled primarily through existing corporate agricultural systems or developed through partnership with independent farming communities." Ellie leaned forward, immediately grasping the implications and which side is winning. "Until recently, the corporate pathway had significant momentum," Reeves acknowledged. "The arguments for infrastructure, efficiency, and rapid deployment are compelling from a certain perspective. But not from yours," Ellie observed. A hint of a smile touched Reeves's typically composed expression. "My experiences in disaster response worldwide have demonstrated repeatedly that centralized systems, while efficient in stable conditions, become catastrophic vulnerabilities during crises. True resilience requires distributed knowledge, local adaptation, and community investment." "Exactly what my husband always said," Catherine interjected with surprise. "He called it the wisdom of many fields, the idea that 1,000 farmers adapting to their specific conditions create more resilient systems than a single corporation imposing standardized methods." "Your husband was ahead of his time." Reeves nodded. "And that philosophy is precisely what has been missing from the committee's deliberations. The perspective of those who actually work the land rather than those who merely manage it from boardrooms." Chun, who had been monitoring communications while they talked, added, "The events of the past 48 hours have created what military strategists call a decisive moment, a circumstance that suddenly shifts the balance in a long-standing conflict." "How so?" Ellie asked. "Biogen's aggressive attempt to acquire the research materials through corporate espionage has weakened their position considerably," Reeves explained. "More importantly, the successful protection of those materials through partnership with local farmers, has demonstrated a viable alternative model." The implications began to crystallize for Ellie. "You're saying our involvement is being used to argue for distributing these seeds through independent farms, rather than corporate channels?" "Not just distributing," Reeves corrected, "but developing. The most effective deployment of these adaptive varieties will require ongoing refinement based on specific local conditions. No corporation, however sophisticated, can match the collective knowledge of thousands of farmers adapting these seeds to their particular soil, water, and climate conditions. Catherine studied the colonel with newfound understanding. You've been advocating for this approach from the beginning, haven't you? Reeves nodded slightly. I've seen too many top-down technological solutions fail when they encounter the complexity of real-world conditions. But abstract arguments for distributed systems were failing to persuade the committee against corporate lobbying until now. The convoy continued its journey as darkness fell, the specialized vehicles making steady progress toward what Ellie learned was a secure research facility nearly 100 miles from Pine Valley. Throughout the trip, Colonel Reeves and Captain Chun outlined the broader implications of the Adaptive Agriculture Initiative, a program far more extensive than Ellie had initially realized. The seeds you helped protect represent just the first generation of climate-adaptive crops, Chun explained. The genetic templates they contain are designed to be further developed and refined through successive plantings in various conditions. Which is why distributed development through independent farms makes more sense than corporate control, Ellie concluded. Each growing season would generate valuable adaptation data from thousands of different microenvironments. Precisely, Reeves confirmed. But convincing the Oversight Committee of this approach required more than theoretical arguments. Your actions during this crisis provided a compelling real-world demonstration. As they approached the research facility, a complex of buildings surrounded by experimental fields and security perimeters, Reeves received another priority communication. After a brief exchange, she turned to the Morgan women with what appeared to be carefully controlled satisfaction. The Oversight Committee has reached a preliminary decision regarding deployment strategy, she announced. They've authorized a pilot program for distributed development through selected independent farms in climate-vulnerable regions. Selected by whom? Catherine asked immediately, her practical farmer's instinct cutting to the crucial detail. That's where it gets interesting, Reeves replied. The committee has authorized my division to establish regional implementation centers, partnerships between military research facilities and local agricultural communities. The implications hit Ellie like a thunderbolt. Eastridge, she said. You're talking about keeping Eastridge open, aren't you? Reeves nodded. Repurposed as the first regional agricultural resilience center, developing these seed varieties in partnership with local farms, rather than closing as previously planned. The convoy passed through multiple security checkpoints before reaching the Central Research Complex. As they disembarked, Ellie witnessed the seed containers being transferred with meticulous care to specialized storage facilities. The container with the master genetic templates, the crown jewels, as Chun had called them, received particularly careful handling under Reeves's direct supervision. Once the transfer was complete, they were escorted to a conference room, where several senior officials awaited, including civilian scientists and military personnel. After introductions, Colonel Reeves formally presented Ellie and Catherine to the gathered officials. Ms. Morgan, she began with uncharacteristic formality. On behalf of the Adaptive Agriculture Initiative, I've been authorized to invite you to participate in the pilot program as partner farmers in the Pine Valley implementation region. One of the civilian officials, introduced as Dr. Harrington, elaborated. What Colonel Reeves is offering, in somewhat military terms, is an opportunity to be among the first independent farms to receive and develop these adaptive seed varieties. Your farm would serve as what we call a primary adaptation site, helping refine these crops for your specific regional conditions. With appropriate compensation and support, of course, added another official. The program includes infrastructure grants to implement necessary growing conditions and monitoring systems. Ellie exchanged glances with her mother, both processing. The extraordinary opportunity being presented. And other farms in Pine Valley? Catherine asked. What about our neighbors? The model envisions concentric implementation, Reeves explained. Beginning with primary adaptation sites like yours, then expanding to secondary and tertiary sites as viable varieties are identified. Within 3 growing seasons, all participating independent farms in the region would have access to adapted varieties. Participating farms, Ellie noted the qualification. What about those already acquired by agrotech? Dr. Harrington sighed slightly. Corporate operations would have access to the adapted varieties as well, but without the preferential timing or support infrastructure provided to independent farms in the program. This isn't about excluding corporate agriculture, but creating a more balanced ecosystem where independent farms can remain viable alongside them. The discussion continued for hours, delving into technical details of the seed varieties, implementation requirements, and the broader vision for transforming Pine Valley into a model of climate-resilient agriculture. Throughout the conversation, Ellie found herself repeatedly impressed by how thoroughly Colonel Reeves and her team had thought through the practical challenges that farmers would face. You've considered everything from soil remediation after flooding to market access for new crop varieties, she observed. This isn't a theoretical program, you've designed it for real-world implementation. That's been Colonel Reeves's insistence from the beginning, Captain Chun explained. Every aspect of the program had to withstand what she calls the mud boot test. Would it make sense to someone standing in a flooded field trying to save their farm? As the meeting concluded, the officials departed, leaving Ellie and Catherine with Colonel Reeves and Captain Chun. The formal presentation had given way to a more practical discussion of next steps. Assuming you choose to participate, Reeves said, the first phase would begin immediately. Your farm would receive infrastructure support to recover from the current flooding, followed by preparation for the first test plantings, using selected varieties from the collection you helped protect. How many farms are you considering for this initial phase? Catherine asked. In Pine Valley, we've identified 12 potential primary adaptation sites based on geographical distribution, soil conditions, and current ownership status, Chen replied, displaying a map on a large screen. Farms that remain independently owned and represent diverse growing conditions. Ellie studied the map, recognizing most of the indicated properties. These are all family farms that have been struggling against both the flooding and agrotech's acquisition efforts. Yes, Reeves confirmed without apology. The program is explicitly designed to maintain agricultural diversity in regions threatened by corporate consolidation. We believe that diversity is essential for true resilience. And Eastridge? Catherine asked. You mentioned repurposing it as a research center. But how soon could that happen? The closure announcement has already triggered an exodus of personnel and resources. The Oversight Committee has authorized immediate reclassification, Reeves replied. The first implementation teams would arrive within 2 weeks, with the center partially operational within a month. Ellie shook her head slightly, still processing the magnitude of what was being proposed. Yesterday, we were fighting to save our farm from flooding while fending off agrotech's acquisition attempts. Today, you're offering us a partnership with a military research program that could transform agriculture throughout our region. It's a lot to absorb. Take whatever time you need to consider, Reeves assured them. Though I should mention that Victor Donovan and his Biogen security team have been detained for questioning regarding their unauthorized activities. Agrotech's acquisition efforts in Pine Valley will likely be suspended pending investigation, which gives all the independent farms in the region breathing room to consider this opportunity without immediate pressure. Chun added. Catherine exchanged a meaningful look with her daughter. I think we both know what your father would say, Ellie. Ellie nodded, a small smile forming. That true innovation belongs in the hands of those who work the land. We accept, Catherine told. Reeves decisively. But we'd like to be involved in the outreach to other farms in the valley. This isn't just about saving our operation. It's about preserving our community. I was hoping you'd say that, Reeves replied with satisfaction. Community leadership is essential for the model we're proposing. This isn't a top-down implementation, but a genuine partnership. As they finalized initial arrangements, Captain Chen approached Ellie with what appeared to be a specialized tablet device. This contains the preliminary data on the seed varieties most suitable for your specific soil conditions, she explained. You'll be the first partner farmer to receive this information. Ellie accepted the device, suddenly struck by the trust being placed in her. Why us? She asked quietly. Out of all the farms you could have approached first, why did you choose ours? Chun glanced at Colonel Reeves, who nodded permission before Chun answered, the truth? We've been monitoring innovative flood adaptation techniques throughout the region for over a year, looking for potential partners who demonstrate both technical skill and community commitment. Your drainage systems and water management innovations were already on our radar before Captain Chun's aircraft ever developed trouble. You're saying my emergency landing on the Morgan farm wasn't entirely coincidental, Chun admitted with a slight smile. While the electrical failure was genuine, I had been conducting an aerial survey of potential implementation sites when it occurred. Your farm was already at the top of our assessment list. Ellie absorbed this revelation with surprise. So when I guided your plane to land on our property, you accelerated a connection we had already intended to establish, Reeves confirmed, though certainly not in such dramatic fashion. The following morning, after resting in quarters provided at the research facility, Ellie and Catherine prepared to return to Pine Valley. The flood waters had begun receding, and initial assessment teams were already being dispatched to evaluate conditions at the proposed primary adaptation sites. As they prepared to board the transport that would return them home, Colonel Reeves approached with a final update. The Oversight Committee has formally approved the Pine Valley implementation model, she informed them. Eastridge's reclassification as an agricultural resilience center is now official. That quickly? Catherine asked with surprise. Biogen's aggressive actions created unexpected momentum, Reeves explained. Their attempt to acquire the research materials through questionable means raised significant concerns about exclusive corporate control of these technologies. Captain Chun, who would be accompanying them back to Pine Valley to coordinate the initial assessment, added, sometimes the best argument for a new approach is demonstrating the flaws in the existing one. As their transport lifted off, Ellie gazed down at the research facility, the place where seeds that could transform agriculture were being preserved and developed. Then her thoughts turned toward home, to the land her family had worked for. Generations now positioned to become part of an agricultural revolution. It won't be easy, Catherine noted, reading her daughter's thoughts. Implementing these new varieties will require learning entirely new growing techniques. We'll be starting from scratch in many ways. That's what farming has always been about, Ellie replied. Adapting to changing conditions, learning new methods, finding ways to work with the land rather than against it. The seeds may be new, but the mindset is as old as agriculture itself. The transport followed a route that gave them a clear view of Pine Valley as they approached. From this height, the flood damage was starkly visible. Fields still partially submerged, structures damaged, roads washed out. Yet Ellie also noticed something she hadn't expected: spots of community activity, where neighbors were already working together to begin recovery efforts. Your community has remarkable resilience, Chun observed, following her gaze, even before our program begins. That's what corporate models never account for, Catherine replied. The invisible infrastructure of community connection that helps farms survive crises. Agrotech sees only the physical assets and production metrics, not the knowledge sharing, equipment lending, and mutual support that makes agricultural communities work. As they descended toward the Morgan farm, which had been designated as the temporary coordination center for the initial assessment phase, Ellie spotted an unexpected gathering of vehicles in their yard. Neighbors had assembled, likely having heard about their return. "Word travels fast," she commented. "Actually, that's my doing," Chun admitted. "I asked Colonel Reeves's permission to contact select community leaders about the preliminary program approval. We needed to begin organizing the assessment process." When they landed, Ellie was greeted by not just neighbors, but familiar faces from throughout Pine Valley, family farmers who had been fighting the same battles against flooding and corporate pressure that her family had faced. Their expressions showed a mixture of curiosity, cautious hope, and the sturdy resilience that characterized agricultural communities. Thomas Jenkins, whose family had sold their farm to Agrotech just before the flood, approached Ellie as she disembarked. "Is it true?" he asked without preamble. "Eastridge is staying open as some kind of agricultural research center?" "It's true," Ellie confirmed. "And they're looking for partner farms to help develop new flood-resistant crop varieties." Sarah Whitman, whose family had been farming the western edge of the valley for 4 generations, stepped forward. "Captain Chun said something about infrastructure grants for flood adaptation. Is that real, or just another government promise that disappears when we need it?" Catherine answered this one. "It's real, Sarah. We've seen the program details. It's not a handout. It's a genuine partnership to develop agriculture that can withstand the conditions we're facing." As more neighbors gathered, Captain Chun joined Ellie and Catherine, allowing them to lead the explanation of what was being proposed. She observed quietly as Ellie outlined the program in practical terms that farmers could immediately relate to, speaking not of genetic science, but of real-world applications: soil remediation, water management, and crop yields. What happened over the next several hours was nothing short of a community transformation. Initial skepticism gave way to cautious interest, then to active engagement as farmers began identifying specific challenges the adaptive seeds might address on their particular properties. By late afternoon, the Morgans' kitchen table was covered with maps as neighbors worked together to coordinate the first phase of assessments. 6 months later, Ellie stood in the newly established monitoring center at what was now officially designated the Eastridge Agricultural Resilience Center. Through the large windows, she could see the experimental fields where the first test plantings of adaptive crop varieties were already showing remarkable results, thriving in soil conditions that would have destroyed conventional crops. Colonel Reeves, now serving as the center's military liaison, joined her at the window. "The Oversight Committee is impressed with the preliminary data," she noted, "particularly the adaptations your community has already implemented to improve the original seed designs." Ellie nodded, thinking of the dozens of small modifications farmers throughout Pine Valley had contributed. Adjustments based on generations of local knowledge combined with the advanced genetics of the research varieties. "That's the advantage of distributed development," she replied. 1,000 eyes seeing different opportunities for improvement that no laboratory could anticipate. "Exactly the argument we made for this model," Reeves agreed with satisfaction. "And now we have the data to prove it works." Through another window, Ellie could see new construction underway: expanded research facilities, training centers, and community coordination spaces. The Eastridge facility, once slated for closure, was now expanding, bringing new jobs and economic activity to Pine Valley. More importantly, she could see Agrotech's acquisition signs disappearing from local properties. With the Resilience Program providing viable alternatives for flood-affected farms, the corporate consolidation that had seemed inevitable just months ago had stalled, then reversed. 3 farms that had been sold to Agrotech before the flood had even been repurchased by their original owners, supported by the community investment fund that had emerged as part of the program. Captain Chun, now permanently assigned to the center as technical liaison, approached with a tablet displaying the latest monitoring data. "The southeastern test field is showing remarkable nitrogen efficiency," she reported. "Almost 40% better than projected. Your modified drainage design is making a significant difference." Ellie smiled, remembering how she had once struggled alone to improve that same drainage system with salvaged parts and desperate ingenuity. Now those same concepts were being implemented with proper resources and integrated into advanced agricultural systems that could be shared with farming communities worldwide. "My father always said that necessity drives innovation," she told them, watching as a group of farmers and scientists worked together in one of the test fields, each contributing their unique perspective to the evolving agricultural system. But partnership perfects it. As they turned back to the monitoring data, Ellie reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had transformed not just her family's farm, but an entire community's future, all beginning with a simple decision to help a stranded pilot land safely on their field. Sometimes, she realized, the most profound change begins with the simplest act of assistance, opening doors to possibilities no one could have imagined. In the fields below, the next generation of climate-resilient crops continued to grow, embodying a new model of agricultural development where military precision merged with farming wisdom, corporate efficiency balanced with community resilience. And the future of food security was being written not in distant boardrooms, but in the rich soil of working farms like hers. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.